The billionaire was dying. But what he whispered to the maid's toddler changed everything. The monitor flatlined for 3 seconds before the nurses rushed in. Alara Santos pressed herself against the hallway wall, mop handle trembling in her grip, her 2-year-old daughter Maya clinging to her hip like a barnacle, wide brown eyes fixed on the chaos erupting through the open doorway of Suite 14. The most expensive room in Harefield Private Medical Center. The room where Roman Voss, the 44-year-old founder of Voss Meridian Holdings, a man whose name appeared on 3 Forbes covers and whose net worth had a comma where most people had a period, had been dying slowly for 11 days. The monitor screamed, then stopped. The team of doctors moved with practiced urgency. Alara turned away, shielding Maya's face against her shoulder. "Mama," Maya whispered against her neck. The man sat. Alara didn't ask how she knew. Maya always knew things like that. She had been hired through the agency 6 weeks ago, a quiet, thorough worker who asked no questions and kept her daughter close in the early morning hours when no childcare was available. The hospital administrator, Mrs. Fenwick, had bent the rules because Alara came with glowing references and because, frankly, no one else wanted the overnight shift on the private wing. The patients here were either too wealthy to tolerate noise or too sick to care about it. Roman Voss, it turned out, was both. She had never spoken to him directly. His personal assistant, a severe man named Garrett, ran interference between Roman and the rest of the world, managing visitors, screening calls, ensuring the uninterrupted quiet that Roman apparently required even while dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis had come 8 months ago. The prognosis, Alara had overheard, was brutal in its precision. 3 months, perhaps 4 with aggressive treatment. Roman had refused the treatment. She had thought that strange, at first. A man with unlimited resources choosing to let death take its natural course. But she had cleaned his room enough times, always in those pre-dawn hours when he slept, to notice things. The lack of get-well cards. The single-framed photograph on his nightstand, a woman and a young boy, both smiling, the photo's edges worn soft from handling. The way the room smelled not just of antiseptic and illness, but of something else. Loneliness, perhaps. The particular kind that belongs to people who have built walls so high that even love can no longer find the door. The monitor resumed its steady rhythm. A nurse stepped out, composed herself, and offered Alara a tired half-smile. "False alarm. He's stable." Alara nodded and continued down the hall with her mop. Maya had fallen asleep again on her hip, her small breath warm against Alara's collarbone. She didn't think about Roman Voss again until the next morning, when everything changed. It happened because Maya was curious about buttons. She always had been a particular obsession with anything that pressed or clicked or lit up. Alara had set her down in the hallway for 30 seconds to wring out the mop, and in those 30 seconds, Maya had toddled through the propped door of Suite 14 with the single-minded determination of a small explorer who had never been told the word forbidden. Alara heard nothing. No cry, no crash. Only, 30 seconds later, the low rasp of a voice she had never heard before, not through walls, not in passing, not in any context, speaking directly. "Hello." She abandoned the mop, pushed through the door, found her daughter standing at the side of Roman Voss's hospital bed, both small hands wrapped around the bed rail, staring at him with the calm, unblinking seriousness that 2-year-olds reserve for things they find genuinely interesting. Roman Voss, propped against pillows, oxygen cannula in place, face drawn and gray from months of illness, was staring back at her with an expression Alara had not expected. Not annoyance. Not dismissal. Something more complicated, more careful. Like a man who had not been looked at in a very long time. "I'm so sorry," Alara said, moving toward Maya. "She's never done this." "Maya, come here, sweetheart." "She asked me why I'm sad," Roman said. Alara stopped. "I'm sorry, your daughter." His voice was a wreck of itself, deep, probably once commanding, now roughened by illness and disuse. She walked in, looked at me, and asked me why I'm sad. In exactly those words. A pause. She's 26 months, Ilera said automatically. Then felt foolish for the precision. Something moved across Roman's face. Not quite a smile, his body seemed to have forgotten the mechanics of that, but something in the neighborhood of it. His gaze moved back to Maya, who had not budged from her position at the rail. Still watching him. Still waiting for an answer. I haven't been asked that in a very long time, he said softly. How to answer a child. You don't have to answer her. She'll forget by. Because I made mistakes, he said. Not to Ilera. To Maya. His voice dropped to something that was almost intimate in its quietness, and Ilera found she couldn't move, couldn't interrupt. I was very unkind to people I loved, and then I was very sorry, but by then it was too late. Maya considered this. Then, with the devastating logic of toddlers everywhere, she said, Say sorry again. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ilera had ever heard. Roman Voss pressed his lips together. His jaw worked. When he looked up at Ilera, there was something raw and unguarded in his eyes, the look of a man who has been cracked open by the most unexpected instrument imaginable. She's remarkable, he said. His voice was almost steady. She's just, Ilera started. Please don't say, just a child, he said quietly. I've spent 40 years dismissing things. I'd rather not do it today. Ilera didn't say anything. She lifted Maya, who went without protest, still watching Roman over her mother's shoulder as they left. She told herself it meant nothing. A brief exchange. A dying man's sentimentality. She would keep her distance, remain professional, complete her contract, and move on. She managed this resolution for exactly 19 hours. It was Garrett who came to find her, stiff and professionally discomfited, delivering the message with the air of a man who had been asked to do something beneath his dignity, but would do it anyway. Mr. Voss is requesting that your daughter visit again tomorrow morning, Garrett said. With appropriate supervision, of course. He's prepared to compensate. She's not for hire, Ilera said flatly. A flicker of something, respect, possibly, crossed Garrett's face. Of course not. He simply meant he recognizes you have no obligation. He's asking as a personal favor. Ilera looked at the man, thought about the worn edges of that photograph, the silence of a room that received no visitors, the look on Roman Voss's face when a 2-year-old had asked him the question no adult had dared. No compensation, she said. And I stay in the room. Naturally. And if she wants to leave, we leave. No hesitation. He's already instructed as much. She told herself she was doing it out of pity. That was easier. The visits became a strange ritual of those early mornings. Ilera would bring Maya in at 6, before the day staff arrived, before the machinery of Roman's professional world began its daily demands. Garrett would be absent. Roman had been precise about that. Just the 3 of them in the blue-gray light of dawn, the monitors keeping their quiet count. Maya, for her part, treated Roman with the same forthright attention she gave everything, directly, without artifice, without the careful distance adults maintained around the sick and powerful. She would climb onto the chair beside his bed. She had learned to do it herself by the 3rd visit, scaling it with focused effort, and she would talk to him about whatever occupied her mind. The bird she'd seen from the window. The particular injustice of having to share her crackers. A dream she'd had about a purple horse. Roman listened with a quality of attention Ilera had rarely seen in any adult. Complete. Unhurried. As though each sentence Maya produced was something worth the full weight of his consideration. On the 5th morning, while Maya was occupied with a set of stacking cups Ilera had brought to keep her busy, Roman spoke without looking away from the child. Tell me about her father, he said. It was said quietly, without presumption, a request, not a demand. But it landed hard anyway. That's not a conversation I have, Ilera said. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine. She smoothed a fold in her uniform. He's not in the picture. That's all there is. Roman was quiet for a moment. Does she ask about him? She's two. She'll ask eventually. I know that. Another silence. Then, my son stopped asking about me 4 years ago. He was 9. His mother told him I was too busy for him. He paused. She wasn't wrong. Alara looked up. The photograph, she said, before she could stop herself. On your nightstand. Something passed over his face. His name is Daniel. He lives in Edinburgh with his mother. I haven't spoken to him in 14 months. His voice was careful and precise, in the way of someone who has rehearsed the sentence to keep it from doing damage. I've been trying to decide whether to contact him he stopped. Before you die, Alara said quietly. He glanced at her. You're very direct. You asked me not to be dismissive. A pause. And then the thing that happened, the corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. Just enough. The first true flicker of a smile she had seen from him. Fair, he said. Maya, from her corner, looked up from her stacking cups. Looked at Roman. Looked at her mother. Then declared, with great authority, Mama. He better now. He was not better, of course. He was dying on a schedule that no amount of morning visits from a toddler could alter. But something was different, and Alara, despite every instruction she had given herself, could feel it happening. Not in him alone. In herself. She had come to this job with a particular armor that single mothers cultivate out of necessity, efficient, unattached, present in body while keeping the softer parts carefully stored somewhere unreachable. She had learned this after Maya's father, a man whose name she had stopped speaking aloud 2 years ago, had left them when Maya was 4 months old. Not with cruelty or drama. Worse, with the quiet, apologetic certainty of a man who had simply decided the weight of fatherhood was more than he wanted to carry. He had set it down and walked away, and the sound of that was something Alara still heard sometimes in the space between sleeping and waking. So she had built her armor, and for 2 years it had held. But there was something about watching Roman Voss, billionaire, recluse, a man who had spent a lifetime accumulating influence and losing everything that mattered, sit in a hospital bed and give a 2-year-old girl his absolute, unguarded attention. It was doing something to a part of her she had thought was safely sealed away. She was not falling for him. She was precise about that. What she was doing was something more dangerous than falling. She was watching a person become real to her. It was on the 11th morning that the first catastrophe arrived. Garrett appeared at the door 15 minutes earlier than usual, his composure fractured in a way Alara had not seen before. Behind him, in the hallway, she could hear voices, sharp, proprietary, belonging to people who were accustomed to arriving and having things arranged to their liking. Mr. Voss, Garrett said, your brother is here. With the family legal counsel. The change in Roman was immediate and total. The ease that had settled around him over the past 2 weeks, gradual, fragile, real, contracted. His face closed. His posture changed. He was no longer a man in a hospital bed. He was a fortress. Tell them I'm resting. They've already. The door opened wider, and a man entered who looked like Roman's photograph taken and shaken by a crueler hand. Same broad structure, same dark eyes, but where Roman's face had softened into something approaching honesty, this man's face was a study in managed pleasantness over something harder. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed, carrying the easy authority of someone who had spent decades assuming rooms would rearrange themselves to accommodate him. Roman. The man's eyes moved to Alara and Maya with a quick, comprehensive scan that reduced them both to variables. I didn't realize you had company. Alara, Roman said, and something in his voice had gone quiet and deliberate. Take Maya and wait in the corridor. Please. She did. But the door did not close all the way. And Alara, who had survived 2 years of doing whatever was necessary, stood in the corridor and listened. The board is concerned, the brother, Marcus, was saying. Your continued refusal to update the succession documents is creating instability. People are starting to. I'm aware of what people are doing. The Singapore merger alone is worth. I know what it's worth, Marcus. Flat. Final. A pause. Then, with a shift in tone that made Alara's skin tighten, I also know you've been in contact with the legal team about competency proceedings. Silence. Don't, Roman said, very quietly. Don't make me fight you in the last months of my life. I would win, and neither of us would recover from it. Marcus left 12 minutes later. He glanced at Maya with an expression she couldn't fully read, not warmth, not hostility. Calculation. She didn't know then what that glance meant. She would find out. The week that followed was the most complicated of Alara's time at Harrowfield. Roman, rattled in ways he tried to conceal, became more present in their morning visits rather than less. As if proximity to Maya, to her complete disinterest in power struggles and succession documents and the assembled machinery of a dying empire, was the only thing that kept him oriented. He started asking Alara questions. Careful, genuinely curious questions about her life that seemed less like interrogation and more like a man relearning how to be interested in another person. How she had gotten into cleaning work, whether she had other ambitions, what Maya's father had been like. She answered more than she intended to. Something about the context, the early light, the monitors, the strange intimacy of illness, made the usual defenses feel performative. I wanted to be a landscape architect, she said one morning, while Maya slept curled in the chair beside Roman's bed, a small fist pressed against her cheek. I studied for 2 years. Then Maya came, and I didn't have the margin for school anymore. Could you go back? Someday. He looked at her steadily. Someday is a word people use when they've decided not to do something, but can't say so yet. She laughed, a real one, small and surprised. That's a very rude observation. Accurate, though? She didn't answer. Which was an answer. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to do something. For her. He nodded toward Maya. Before, while I still can. I want to set up an educational trust. For her schooling, her future. Whatever she decides to want. Alara felt the warmth of the gesture and the weight of it simultaneously. That's not necessary. I know it isn't. His voice was patient. It's also not about necessity. She came in here and asked me a question no one had asked me in years. She treated me like a person when I had mostly forgotten what that felt like. He paused. I'm not buying anything. I'm not making a transaction. I'm trying to do something good with what I have left. Alara thought about armor. Thought about the particular loneliness of protecting yourself so thoroughly that generosity starts to feel like an attack. I'll think about it, she said. His eyes held something that might have been relief. She didn't have time to think about it, because 3 days later, she discovered what Marcus Voss's calculating glance had meant. She arrived for the morning shift to find Garrett waiting for her at the building entrance, his composure entirely absent for the first time. There's a problem, he said. Mr. Voss asked me to warn you before you came up. What had happened was this. Marcus Voss, through his attorney, had filed a formal complaint with the hospital administration alleging that Alara had been improperly granted access to a high-profile patient, that her child's presence constituted a safety and sanitation violation, and that the relationship between the patient and the employee had developed in ways that raised questions of undue influence over a vulnerable person. The complaint used careful, measured language that stopped short of explicit accusation while implying everything. Alara stood in the lobby and felt something cold move through her. She recognized this particular type of attack, not head-on but architectural, designed to eliminate her not through confrontation but through institutional procedure. Mrs. Fenwick wants to speak with you, Garrett said. She's trying to be fair. But the complaint has triggered a review, and during the review your access to the private wing has been suspended. Suspended, Alara repeated. I'm sorry. She looked at him, looked at the building. Thought about a 2-year-old who had walked through a door and asked a dying man why he was sad and who had begun to wake something up in him. Does he know? He's the one who sent me to tell you. She nodded, walked back to her car, sat for a long moment, then took out her phone and called the one number she almost never used. Her sister, a paralegal, who knew things. The review process took 6 days. 6 days during which Alara worked the standard floors, avoided the private wing, and received a text message each evening that she told herself she would stop reading. She never stopped reading. They were from Roman's phone, brief, composed with visible effort, the writing of a man who had not sent personal text messages in years. The first one said only, "She's asking about you. About the window bird." Second, "I told her the bird comes back every morning." She seemed satisfied with this. Third, "I've been in contact with Daniel. He's coming." I may have made a grammatical error somewhere in that sentence. I find I don't care. The fourth message was different. "I know what Marcus is doing. I want you to know that I am handling it. I am also aware that telling you I'm handling it is likely to produce the same response in you as it would in anyone with sense. So instead I'll say, you have more support than you currently know about. Trust that." She read it 4 times, then put her phone face down on her kitchen counter and made Maya's dinner. On the 7th day, Mrs. Fenwick called her into the office and delivered the review results with the slightly embarrassed efficiency of someone who had been made to understand they'd been used as a tool. The complaint had been filed in violation of the hospital's own whistleblower protocols. Marcus had used a third-party attorney rather than proper channels, had submitted documentation that turned out to be selectively edited, and had named his own legal team's interest in Roman's estate in a disclosure that he had apparently assumed no one would read carefully. Someone had read it carefully. "Your access is reinstated, effective immediately," Mrs. Fenwick said. "And I've been informed that Mr. Voss has made a significant donation to the hospital's pediatric wing. He asked me to tell you he's been doing things with what he has left." Alara looked at the administrator. "What tipped the review?" Mrs. Fenwick hesitated. "An anonymous submission. Documentation of Marcus Voss's legal team's filings, some of it suggesting a pattern of similar actions against other people in Roman's life over the past several years." A pause. Quite comprehensive. Someone had been compiling it for a while. Alara thought about Garrett, about a man who had worked for Roman Voss for 11 years and had, perhaps, been watching and waiting for the moment when loyalty needed to become something more active. She went upstairs. Roman looked worse than he had a week ago. The trajectory of his illness was not kind, and 7 days had taken a visible toll. He was awake when she came in, and when he saw Maya toddle through the door ahead of her, his face did something that broke Alara's careful management of her own heart entirely. It wasn't a smile, exactly. It was more than that. It was a man receiving something he had been quietly certain he no longer deserved. Maya climbed her chair, looked at him with the frank assessment of one who had been temporarily deprived of something and had opinions about this. "You still here?" she said. "I'm still here," Roman agreed. "Good." She picked up her stacking cups from where Alara had left them the week before, and proceeded to demonstrate her tower-building technique as though there had been no interruption at all. Roman looked at Alara. She looked at him. There was a full conversation in that, the gratitude and the fear and the awareness of what was not being said, and neither of them spoke it aloud because some things are true enough that saying them out loud only makes them smaller. "Daniel is arriving Thursday," Roman said after a moment. "I didn't know how to call him. I wrote the message 11 times. A pause. "He called me back within 4 minutes. Alara sat down. "What did he say?" "He said he'd been waiting for me to call since he was 12. That he'd practiced what he would say if I ever did. That he'd been rehearsing it for 2 years. A longer pause. He said hi. She heard herself laugh, then heard, underneath the laugh, that she was also close to crying, and decided not to examine either impulse too closely. What about Marcus? She asked. Something shifted in Roman's expression. Decisive.
Clean.
Garrett delivered documentation to the board this morning. Marcus has been quietly diverting funds from a subsidiary for approximately 6 years. Not enough to constitute a major scandal, but enough that pursuing the competency proceedings would invite scrutiny he can't survive. He looked at her steadily. He'll contest the will, but he'll lose. I've had the documents redrawn and witnessed by 3 independent parties. It's iron. A pause. The educational trust for Maya is part of the estate documentation. It's done, regardless of what happens next. I wanted you to know that it can't be undone. She should have argued. Instead, she found herself thinking of Maya at 20, at 30. Of the landscape architecture degree she had quietly stopped imagining herself finishing.
Of the word someday.
You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. He looked at her with something that was quiet and honest and undemanding. I wanted to. There's a difference. The monitors kept their count. Outside the window, the bird Maya had been promised was there on the ledge, a sparrow, small and brown and indifferent to dying men and single mothers and the precise weight of kindness offered without conditions. Maya pointed at it. Bird back, she announced.
Told you, said Roman.
Daniel Voss was 17, tall, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentler expression. He arrived on Thursday morning like someone who had spent years preparing for something and was now discovering that preparation was both insufficient and exactly enough. He stood in the doorway of Suite 14 and looked at his father, and his father looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched long enough to contain all 14 missed months, and the 4 years before that, and the 9-year-old who had stopped asking. Then Daniel said, You look terrible. And Roman said, You're taller than your photographs. And it wasn't forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that happens in a single threshold moment, no matter what the movies promise, but it was a beginning. A door opening. Alara had brought Maya for the morning visit, but had been quietly prepared to leave early, to give them their space. But Maya had not been consulted about this plan. She had surveyed Daniel with interest, then announced, You the boy in the picture. Daniel blinked, looked at the nightstand photograph, looked back at Maya.
Yeah.
That's me. Older me. You sad too? Maya asked. A pause. Daniel glanced at his father. His father watched him with the same complete, unguarded attention he gave Maya, as if each sentence was worth the full weight of consideration. I was, Daniel said carefully. I think I'm less sad now. Maya nodded, apparently satisfied, returned to her stacking cups. Daniel sat down beside his father, and they began, quietly and imperfectly and genuinely, the work of becoming known to each other again. 3 weeks later, Roman Voss asked Alara to marry him, and she said no. She said it gently and completely, and with a clarity that she hoped he would understand was not about him. They had been sitting in the early light, and he had spoken carefully, in the manner of a man who had learned to choose his words with a new kind of care. I'm not asking for what you think I'm asking for, he said. I'm not asking you to be my companion through dying, or to inherit, or for any transaction. I'm asking because you are the first person in 15 years who has treated me like someone worth being honest with. I'm asking because, whatever time I have left, I want to be in proximity to the kind of person you are. A pause. I understand entirely if the answer is no. She took a long breath. If we had met in a different context. If you were not, she stopped. Dying, he offered, without bitterness. Yes. She looked at him. I think you know me well enough to know that I can't do something like this halfway. And you also know that whatever this is, whatever has happened in these rooms over these weeks, I am not able to separate it from the context, from the grief and the timing. I don't know if what I feel is real, or if it's the particular feeling of watching someone become the best version of themselves when there's no time left. She looked at her hands. That's not a kind thing to say. It's an honest one. He was quiet for a moment. I think you're right. I think I deserve that assessment. I want you to go back to school, he said then. That's what I actually want. I want you to be a landscape architect. I want Maya to have her trust and her future. I want Daniel to know his father for whatever time remains. And I want, his voice dropped. I want to be someone who didn't spend his last months trying to hold on to things. She looked at him, felt the fullness of that silence, of a man who had spent a lifetime accumulating and was now, carefully, setting things down. Ask me something else, she said quietly. He looked at her. Not marriage. Not a contract. Something smaller. She looked at him steadily. Ask me to stay today. A long pause. Will you stay today? He said. Yes, she said. I'll stay today. Roman Voss died on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after Maya had toddled through his door and asked him why he was sad. He died with Daniel at his bedside, a 17-year-old who had driven through the night when the final signal came, who had held his father's hand through the last hours, who had said all the things that had been rehearsed and more things that hadn't been rehearsed at all, who had laughed, once, at something his father said that Alara had not been able to hear, and who had cried for a long time after, the way only someone can cry who has gotten both less and more than they hoped for. Alara was in the corridor. She had said her own goodbye 3 days before, when Roman had been lucid and they had talked for a long time about the landscape architecture program she had already, quietly, re-enrolled in. About the trust document, which was simple and generous and demanded nothing in return. About Maya, who had fallen asleep mid-visit and whose sleeping face Roman had looked at for a long time without speaking. What are you thinking? Alara had asked. That she's going to change the world in ways I won't get to see, he'd said. Alara had not answered that. She'd taken his hand, which he had allowed, and they had sat in the quiet of the morning for a while, and it had been enough. It had been more than enough. The sparrow had been on the ledge. In the months that followed, life arranged itself around its new shape the way life does, not tidily, not according to any plan, but organically, making room for what was real. Daniel visited twice. The first time, he sat in Alara's kitchen and talked for 3 hours about his father, assembling the man from evidence, from the morning visits Alara described, from things Garrett told him, from the 11 rewritten drafts of the message that had become the phone call that had become the beginning of something. The second time, he brought photographs. Roman at 30, at 25, in contexts where he was laughing with an ease that had apparently been lost and was only being recovered at the end. Maya had studied the photographs with great seriousness. Then he was happy then. He was, Daniel said. He was happy at the end too, Maya said. I made him happy. Daniel looked at Alara over her daughter's head. His eyes were bright in a complicated way. Yeah, he said. You did. The trust document contained a paragraph at the end that was not legal language. It had clearly been added by Roman himself, in phrasing that made the lawyers uncomfortable and that Alara had been told could be removed if she wished. She did not wish. It said, to Maya, who asked the question, I hope you keep asking. I hope you are always the person who walks into rooms and sees what other people have decided not to look at. I hope you're always someone who expects an honest answer. The world needs more of whatever you are. Maya couldn't read yet. Alara read it to her anyway, on an ordinary evening when Maya was sitting on the kitchen floor drawing purple horses with great conviction. Maya listened carefully, then looked up. When did he write that? Before he died. Maya considered this, then returned to her purple horse. He knew me, she said, in the satisfied tone of one confirming something already understood. He did, Alara said. She put the document back in its folder. Outside the kitchen window, the evening light was doing something specific and golden to the garden, the kind of light that made even ordinary things look like something worth designing around. The kind of light that reminded her, newly and persistently, of everything she intended to build. She had an enrollment confirmation on her phone. She had a daughter who asked hard questions and expected real answers. She had learned, over 6 weeks of early mornings and a sparrow on a window ledge, That proximity to someone else's courage has a way of loosening the locks you've put on your own. Maya set down her crayon, looked out the window, looked at her mother. "Mama," she said, "you better now." Alara felt the full weight of the question, its simplicity, its accuracy, the extraordinary inheritance of it.
"Getting there," she said.
"Yeah, I think I'm getting there." Maya nodded, the nod of one who accepts a work in progress, and picked up her crayon again. The purple horse waited. The evening light held. And somewhere in the logic of small things that change everything, it was enough. And